The heart monitor screamed. A single relentless tone echoed through room 214 of the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in rural Pennsylvania. Frank Kowalski lay motionless in the hospital bed. His weathered face was pale. His chest no longer rose beneath the thin white blanket. Around him, the room stood frozen. No one reached for the crash cart. No one called for the defibrillator. No one began CPR, because clipped to the front of his chart was a single sheet of paper. Do not resuscitate. Standing at the foot of the bed, Claire Donovan stared at it. The DNR order trembled in her hands. Behind her, charge nurse Margaret Ellis barked across the room. "Put it down, Claire." Claire didn't answer. She looked at Frank, then back at the paper. Something wasn't right. Every instinct she'd built over 11 years as a trauma nurse was screaming louder than the flat line echoing through the room. Margaret took another step. "Don't you dare!" The attending physician shook his head. "It's over." Claire's fingers tightened around the paper. 30 seconds from now, she would make a decision that could end her career. 60 seconds from now, security would be called. 90 seconds from now, the man everyone believed was dead would open his eyes. And less than 24 hours later, his son would walk into the hospital carrying proof that would change everything. 22 hours earlier. The Veterans Affairs Medical Center looked almost peaceful beneath the orange glow of an autumn sunset. Leaves drifted across the parking lot as nurses hurried through the employee entrance, coffee cups in hand. Claire Donovan parked her aging blue Honda in her usual corner. The check engine light had been glowing for nearly 2 months. She ignored it. Replacing an engine wasn't possible on a nurse's salary, especially not when every spare dollar seemed to disappear before payday. She grabbed her lunch bag and walked inside. The familiar scent of antiseptic and fresh coffee greeted her. Home. At least that is how it felt after nearly a decade. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. She wasn't the nurse everyone noticed, but she was the one everyone quietly trusted. If a new graduate panicked, they found Claire. If a family needed someone to explain complicated news, they found Claire. If another nurse was overwhelmed, Claire somehow appeared before anyone asked. She had never once been written up, never missed a shift, never challenged a physician in public. Rules mattered, procedures mattered, patience mattered even more. At exactly 6:45 p.m., she stepped into the staff lounge. Charge nurse Margaret Ellis looked up from the assignment board. "Evening, Donovan." "Evening." Margaret handed her the patient list. "You've got rooms 210 through 214. Claire scanned the names, then stopped. 214, Frank Kowalski, hospice care, comfort measures only. She looked up. "New admission?" Margaret nodded. "Transferred from oncology 3 weeks ago. Metastatic pancreatic cancer, no further treatment." Claire quietly nodded. She'd cared for many hospice patients. Helping someone die peacefully wasn't giving up. Sometimes it was the greatest kindness medicine could offer. Still, something about the chart caught her attention. Military history, Vietnam, 82nd Airborne Division, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, 3 tours. She whispered almost to herself, "You've seen enough." An hour later, Claire knocked gently on room 214. "Mr. Kowalski?" A gravelly voice answered immediately. "If you're bringing coffee, come on in." She smiled before opening the door. Frank Kowalski looked nothing like the image Claire had formed from reading his chart. Yes, he was thin. His cheeks had hollowed. Cancer had stolen much of his strength. But his eyes, they sparkled. He sat upright in bed wearing thick reading glasses while carefully folding a tiny square of blue paper. Claire walked closer. "Origami?" Frank grinned. "My granddaughter says old soldiers need hobbies." He held up the finished creation, a tiny paper crane. Claire laughed. "That's beautiful." Frank shrugged. "I make one every morning." "What happens to them?" He pointed towards a glass jar on the windowsill. Inside sat dozens of colorful cranes. Claire looked surprised. "You've folded all these?" "Hospital food isn't exactly exciting." He leaned closer. "So I had to become interesting somehow." Claire couldn't help laughing. "You've succeeded." Over the next several hours, she found herself visiting room 214 more often than any other patient. Not because Frank demanded attention, quite the opposite. He made every conversation feel effortless. When Claire checked his medications, he thanked her. When dietary accidentally brought cold soup, he joked that the army had prepared him for worse. When another veteran down the hall became anxious during the night, Frank asked Claire to deliver one of his paper cranes. "Tell him another stubborn old paratrooper said tomorrow's worth sticking around for." Near midnight, Claire brought him fresh coffee. Frank took one careful sip. He made a dramatic face. Claire laughed. "That bad?" He nodded solemnly. "Best coffee in Pennsylvania." He paused. "Still terrible." Claire shook her head. "I'll pass your compliments to the cafeteria." "Please don't. I'd like to leave this world on good terms." Both of them laughed. Then Frank grew quiet. He looked out the window. "You know, I've never been afraid of dying." Claire gently adjusted his blanket. "Most veterans tell me that." He nodded. "It's not dying that scares me. It's leaving things unfinished." Claire didn't pry. Experience had taught her that patients spoke when they were ready. After several moments, Frank quietly continued. "My son." Claire looked toward him. "We haven't spoken much. I made mistakes. So did he." He swallowed. "I kept thinking, there's always time." Claire softly replied, "Sometimes there still is." Frank smiled sadly. "I hope you're right." At 1:35 a.m., Claire reviewed Frank's overnight chart. Something caught her eye. His blood pressure had dropped, expected. His oxygen level had fallen slightly, also expected, but his heart rhythm. She frowned. The pattern wasn't what she'd normally seen in end-stage cancer patients. Instead of gradually weakening, it fluctuated strangely. Brief recoveries, unexpected dips, almost as though something else was affecting him. She checked his medications again. Everything appeared correct. Still, the feeling wouldn't leave her. She walked to the nurse's station. "Margaret," the charge nurse looked up. "What is it?" "I'd like Dr. Harris to re-evaluate Mr. Kowalski." Margaret frowned. "Why?" "I'm not sure. I just don't like his rhythm." Margaret glanced at the monitor. "Hospice patients crash." "I know, but this doesn't look typical." Margaret sighed. "Claire, he's terminal. The family signed comfort measures. He signed the DNR himself." Claire nodded. "I understand, but I'd still like another assessment." Margaret reluctantly paged the attending physician. 10 minutes later, Dr. Stephen Harris entered room 214. He listened to Frank's lungs, checked his pupils, reviewed the monitor, then looked at Claire. "What concerns you?" Claire pointed towards the rhythm strip. "It doesn't feel consistent with natural decline." Dr. Harris studied the screen. After a long pause, he smiled kindly. "You're one of the best nurses on this floor, but terminal patients don't always follow textbook patterns." Claire remained silent. "I think we're watching the final stages." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've done good work tonight. There isn't anything else we should put him through." Claire nodded politely. "Yes, doctor." But as she looked back towards Frank, the uneasiness remained. Somewhere, deep inside, a quiet voice kept whispering the same thought, "Look again." And less than an hour later, that quiet voice would ask her to risk everything. At 2:17 a.m., the alarm shattered the silence. One sharp tone, then another. Claire looked toward room 214. Frank's heart rate had plunged from 42 to 28. She was already running before anyone called for help. When she reached the room, Frank was gasping. His breathing came in long, uneven pauses. His skin had taken on a grayish color. The paper crane he had folded earlier that evening rested on the bedside table, illuminated by the soft glow of the monitor. Claire immediately checked his airway. "Frank?" His eyelids fluttered. He looked toward her, but his eyes couldn't quite focus. His lips moved. She leaned closer. His voice cracked. "I don't want." The sentence never finished. His body suddenly relaxed. The monitor let out a long, continuous tone. Flatline. For one frozen second, the room became completely silent. Then the overhead speaker crackled. "Room 214, nursing assistance requested." Within seconds, nurses poured into the room. Margaret arrived first. Behind her came Dr. Harris. The crash cart stopped just outside the doorway. Claire instinctively reached for it. Margaret stepped directly in front of her. "No." Claire looked at her. "He has no pulse." "I know." "He's DNR." Claire looked toward Frank, then toward the bright red bracelet around his wrist. "Do not resuscitate." Dr. Harris quietly removed his stethoscope. "Time of cardiac arrest." He checked the wall clock. 2:18. Claire couldn't believe what she was seeing. No one was moving. No one was touching him. The crash cart sat unused. The defibrillator remained switched off. Everything inside her screamed that this was wrong. She stepped closer to the bed. "Doctor!" Dr. Harris looked at her. "He isn't gone." The physician sighed. "Claire." "He has terminal cancer." "I know. But something still isn't right." Margaret folded her arms. "This isn't about what feels right. It's about what he legally requested." Claire looked at Frank's face. Only an hour earlier, he had been joking about terrible coffee, talking about paper cranes, wondering whether there was still time to repair a broken relationship with his son. He hadn't looked like someone ready to die. He had looked unfinished. Claire picked up the patient's chart one final time. If she couldn't change what was happening, at least she wanted to understand it. Her eyes scanned page after page. Medication records, oncology notes, hospice admission, advanced directives. Then she stopped. Something caught her attention. The DNR form. She frowned. The signature looked shaky, almost rushed. Beneath it, a witness signature. Another witness. Date? October 14. Claire turned another page. Hospital ICU admission, also October 14. Time, 7:10 a.m. She looked again.
The DNR showed it had supposedly been signed at 8:35 a.m. Her eyes widened. She flipped to the ICU procedure notes. There it was. At 7:42 a.m., patient intubated. Continuous sedation initiated. She stared at the page. Sedation. Before the DNR had been signed. Her heart began pounding. She looked toward Dr. Harris. When was this DNR verified? He frowned. What? This form. When was anyone asked to confirm the signature? Margaret interrupted sharply. Claire, enough. She held up the paperwork. The times don't make sense. Dr. Harris stepped forward. This isn't the time. No, Claire replied quietly. This is exactly the time. The alarm continued screaming. Flatline. Every second mattered. Claire looked around the room. No one else seemed willing to question the document. Margaret's voice hardened. Put the chart down. Claire looked back at Frank. Then she remembered something he'd said only hours earlier. It's not dying that scares me. It's leaving things unfinished. Her mind flashed to another memory. Not from the hospital, from 20 years earlier. She was 19, standing beside another hospital bed. Her father, Army mechanic, Gulf War veteran. He had suffered a catastrophic stroke. A young resident had quietly explained there was nothing more they could do. Claire had held her father's hand as the monitors slowly faded. Just before the end, his fingers squeezed hers. Once, twice. His eyes opened for only a moment. She had always wondered, had he been trying to tell her something? Or had she imagined it because she wasn't ready to let him go? That question never left her. It became the reason she entered nursing. Not because she believed medicine could save everyone, but because every patient deserved someone willing to look one more time. The memory disappeared. She was back in room 214. The flat line still echoed through the room. Claire looked again at the DNR, then at Frank. Her voice was almost a whisper. I can't trust this. Margaret's expression changed instantly. Claire, don't. Dr. Harris stepped forward. We'll investigate later. If there's a problem with the paperwork, administration can review it. Claire shook her head. He doesn't have later. The physician's face tightened. If you ignore a DNR, you could lose your nursing license. I know. You could lose this job. I know. You could face legal action. Claire's eyes never left Frank. I know. The room seemed impossibly still. Every nurse watched. No one spoke. Claire slowly lifted the DNR order. Her hands trembled. She looked at the paper one final time. If this document is wrong, then we're about to let a man die because no one wanted to ask another question. Margaret took a step toward her. Claire Donovan, put that paper down. Instead, Claire tore it cleanly down the middle. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Rip. No one moved. Margaret gasped. My God, you've lost your mind. Claire threw the torn papers on the bedside table. then spun toward the crash cart, charging to 200 joules. Margaret shouted, "Stop her!" But Rebecca, one of the younger nurses, hesitated for a second. Then she rolled the crash cart forward. Claire grabbed the defibrillator pads. "Clear!"
The first shock lifted Frank's body slightly from the bed. The monitor remained flat. Margaret reached for the room phone. "I'm calling security." Claire ignored her. "Resume compressions." Rebecca immediately began CPR. Dr. Harris stood frozen, unable to decide whether to stop them or help. Claire charged the paddles again. "Clear!" The second shock. Nothing. The flat line continued. Margaret looked at Claire with tears of frustration. "Please, stop! It's over!" Claire stared at the monitor, then back at Frank. "No," she whispered. "One more." She charged the paddles for a third time. The room held its breath. "Everybody clear!" The paddles came down. A sharp crack filled the room. Frank's body jerked. Silence. 1 second. 2. 3. Then, beep! A tiny spike appeared on the monitor. Another. Then another. A slow, fragile heartbeat. Rebecca stopped compressions. The rhythm grew stronger. 32 beats per minute. 38. 45. A breath escaped Frank's lips. His fingers twitched. His eyes slowly opened. Barely louder than a whisper, he spoke. "Michael." Then he lost consciousness again. The room was utterly silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Margaret stood frozen, staring at the monitor that had just proven the impossible. But Claire wasn't looking at the monitor anymore. She was looking at the torn DNR lying on the floor and wondering whether she had just saved a life or destroyed her own. The silence lasted only a few seconds. Then the room exploded into motion. "He's back!" Rebecca shouted. Dr. Harris snapped out of his disbelief. "Get respiratory in here. Move him to ICU. Start noradrenaline. Notify cardiology." The crash cart rolled beside the bed as nurses hurried to stabilize Frank. Claire stepped back, breathing heavily. Only moments earlier, everyone had been preparing for a death certificate. Now they were fighting to keep a man alive. Frank's heartbeat climbed slowly. 43, 48, 51. Weak, but unmistakably alive. As the ICU team wheeled him toward the elevator, Frank briefly opened his eyes again. His gaze found Claire. His lips barely moved. "Thank." That was all he managed before exhaustion pulled him back into unconsciousness. The elevator doors closed. Claire stood alone in the hallway. She hadn't even noticed that her hands were shaking. "Claire Donovan." The voice behind her was cold. She turned. Margaret Ellis stood with the nursing supervisor and 2 hospital security officers. Margaret's face showed no anger now, only disappointment. "Please hand over your ID badge." Claire looked at it for a long moment, the blue badge she'd worn every day for 11 years. She unclipped it from her uniform. The supervisor accepted it quietly. "Pending a formal investigation, you're suspended from all clinical duties." Claire nodded. "I understand."
You'll be contacted after the hospital completes its review." She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply picked up her lunch bag from the staff lounge. As she walked toward the parking lot, dozens of employees looked up from their work. News traveled quickly in hospitals. Everyone already knew the nurse who had torn up a DNR. The drive home felt longer than usual. Rain tapped gently against the windshield. Claire barely noticed. Her mind replayed the night over and over. Had she done the right thing? Frank was alive, that much was certain. But what if the DNR had been completely valid? Had she violated his wishes? Had she crossed a line no nurse should ever cross? For the first time in years, she wasn't sure. The next morning, Claire sat at her kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Her phone remained silent. No emails, no calls, just waiting. Finally, shortly after 9, it rang. The caller ID read Veterans Affairs Medical Center. Claire closed her eyes before answering. "This is Claire." A familiar voice responded. It was Dr. Harris. "Can you come to the hospital?" Claire's stomach tightened. "So the review board is meeting?" "No." His voice sounded strangely different. "Someone wants to see you." "Who?" "The patient." Claire blinked. "Frank?" "He's awake, and he refuses to speak to anyone else until you get here." 20 minutes later, Claire walked back through the hospital's front entrance. Without her ID badge, she felt strangely out of place. Employees glanced toward her as she passed. Some smiled quietly, others looked away. She couldn't tell what anyone was thinking. When she reached the ICU, Dr. Harris met her outside room 8. "You should know there's someone else inside." Claire nodded nervously. She pushed open the door. Frank Kowalski sat upright in bed. His color had improved dramatically. An oxygen cannula rested beneath his nose. The heart monitor displayed a steady rhythm. Beside him stood a man in his mid-40s, broad shoulders, military haircut, red eyes from crying. The moment Claire entered, the man crossed the room. Before she could say a word, he hugged her tightly. "Thank you." Claire froze. You don't know me." He stepped back, wiping his eyes. "I'm Michael. My father kept asking if the nurse named Claire was all right." Frank laughed weakly. "I told him, good nurses worry too much." Claire laughed softly through tears. "So I've been told." Michael reached for a worn leather folder lying on the bedside table. "I think this belongs in the investigation." Claire looked at it. "What is it?" "My father's legal documents." He opened the folder carefully. Inside were copies of medical directives, insurance papers, military records. Then the DNR, not a photocopy, the original. Michael laid it gently on the bed. "This is the form everyone is talking about." Claire nodded quietly. It was signed October 14th. Michael looked at Claire. "That's what everyone thinks." He slid another document across the blanket. ICU procedure record. Same time, same hospital. Claire immediately recognized it. She had seen a copy the night before. Michael pointed to one line, 7:42 a.m., patient intubated and placed on continuous sedation. Then he pointed to the DNR, Signature time, 8:35 a.m. He looked directly at Claire. My father couldn't have signed this. Claire remained silent. Michael continued. He stayed sedated for nearly 3 days. Dr. Harris quietly stepped closer. Michael reached into the folder again. This is the hospital's sedation log, another document, signed by 2 physicians, timestamps matching exactly. Then another, a notarized statement from the attorney who had prepared Frank's estate months earlier. He planned to sign a new DNR after discussing it with me. Michael swallowed hard, but that meeting never happened. So this one, he gently touched the document, was never legally executed. The room became completely silent. Dr. Harris slowly lowered his head. Claire whispered, "So?" Michael finished the sentence. "My father never had a valid DNR." Just then, the hospital administrator entered the room with 2 members of the legal department. Margaret Ellis followed behind them. The administrator looked at Michael. "Mr. Kowalski, we've reviewed the records you've provided." Michael nodded. "I have too." The administrator took a slow breath. "Our legal counsel has confirmed the document is invalid." She turned toward Claire. "Nurse Donovan, the disciplinary investigation against you is hereby terminated." Margaret stared at the floor. She couldn't speak. She couldn't. The administrator continued. "In fact, had resuscitation not been attempted, the hospital would likely have been responsible for allowing treatment to be withheld under an invalid directive." Dr. Harris stepped toward Claire. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "You were right to question it." Claire shook her head. "I wasn't trying to be right. I was trying to be sure." 11 more days passed. It was not a miracle. The cancer didn't disappear. Medicine couldn't change that. But those 11 days became something far more valuable. Michael canceled his return flight. Every morning, he sat beside his father's bed. They laughed about old fishing trips, apologized for years lost to pride, looked through faded military photographs together. One afternoon, Frank folded a paper crane with trembling hands. He handed it to his son. "For your little girl." Michael smiled through tears. "She'll love it." Another evening, Claire walked in to find the 2 men laughing uncontrollably. "What did I miss?" Frank grinned. "I finally admitted your hospital coffee really is terrible." On the 11th morning, Claire arrived just before sunrise. The room was quiet. Michael held his father's hand. Frank opened his eyes one last time. He looked first at his son, then at Claire. His voice was barely audible. No more unfinished things. Michael squeezed his father's hand. "We're okay, Dad." Frank smiled, a peaceful smile. The monitor slowed. His breathing became softer, and surrounded by the 2 people who had given him 11 priceless days, Frank Kowalski quietly slipped away. This time, there was no panic, no unanswered questions, no uncertainty, only peace. Several weeks later, Claire returned to her usual shift. Nothing about the emergency department had changed. Patients still arrived, monitors still beeped, coffee was still terrible. Before clocking in, she opened her locker. Inside rested a small glass jar filled with colorful paper cranes. Beside it lay one neatly folded piece of paper. Not a DNR, but a handwritten note from Michael. Those 11 days gave my daughter memories she'll have for the rest of her life. Thank you for looking one more time when everyone else stopped. Claire folded the note and placed it back in the jar. Just then, the trauma doors burst open. Incoming patient. She smiled, pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, and walked toward another room. Because nursing had never been about always being right. It had always been about caring enough to look one more time.